My name's Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg. I am the president of INSA and delighted to see all of you all here this morning. We have an outstanding program in store for you all. The need for a trust no one, verify always approach is crucial for defending against continuous cyber threats. However, reaching higher levels of zero trust maturity presents challenges such as technical depth, limited resources, and integration issues. Despite these challenges, there are opportunities for cost-effective improvements in cybersecurity aligned with zero trust principles, which our speakers will discuss today. But before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is on the record, open to the press, and is being recorded, so it'll be available for viewing later this week if you want to share with your colleagues. I also wanted to mention there are question cards at your table, compliments of CACI. Our amazing graduate student interns will be roaming the room and collecting these question cards. Several of them graduate from grad school in May and are looking for jobs in the intelligence community, so please get to know them today. And finally, we couldn't host these types of events without the support of our sponsors, CACI, Cisco, Mantech, and SAIC. Their critical support really is crucial to our programming. I also wanted to introduce my colleague, John Doyon, who will be our moderator. John is our EVP here at INSA, and joining him is a terrific lineup of speakers. Gurpreet Bhatia, who is the Principal Director for Cybersecurity and Deputy CISO for the Department of Defense, Neal Ziring, Technical Director, Cybersecurity Directorate at NSA, and Steve Orrin, who chairs our Cyber Council and is Federal CTO for Intel Corporation. Over to you, gentlemen. Thanks.
I think I'm good. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. You can hear me? Great. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm John Doyon. I'm pleased to meet you. Hope everybody had some nice breakfast. And I'm really excited to be here with sort of the A-listers of cybersecurity that we have on the stage with me today. So it should be a great conversation. And as we discussed, we'll probably have about 40 minutes or so of some questions and discussion up here. As you think of questions as we go along, write them on those cards and send them in, and we'll have plenty of time to get to audience questions in the second half of the program. And so we go all the way to like close to 10 o'clock here. So got plenty of time to get into the weeds of this subject. So just a little bit of a scene setter here. Every year, as you know, cybersecurity threats are increasing in number, severity, scope. They threaten critical infrastructure, business information, proprietary data, national security information. And so recognizing the need for increased vigilance in the cybersecurity area and new approaches, there's been a path forward that's really pushing to implement zero trust as a cybersecurity framework. So the White House has come out with guidance on this. There's, presidents had an executive order. There's a national security memo. Departments and agencies across the federal space have requirements that they need to meet. Perhaps the one that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about here today is DoD, of course, and the Department of Defense rolled out their zero trust strategy, and there's this, mind-blowing implementation plan and all the charts. There's so much going on in this space, all about improving cybersecurity. But how do you approach zero trust? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, and with a particular focus on what can you do right now with perhaps current capabilities in your current network and your current IT systems that you have to improve cybersecurity as part of a larger zero trust approach. It'd be nice if you could go buy everything brand new and, it'd be completely have all the newest bells and whistles, but that might not be practical. What can you do when you have constraints? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll start off Just want to say hello to these gentlemen here again. And I'll start with Gurpreet. And the question is, let's just start, maybe you can help walk us through some of the steps. What is a zero trust architecture? And where are we? Why is it important to organizations and industry partners alike?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. As we look from the department's perspective, zero trust is really a paradigm shift for us. It is an incredibly massive effort that we have not probably undertaken something like this in maybe 2 decades or more. And as the space has evolved, right, we have started to think about information security to ComSec security to information assurance, and now we're really sort of bringing it all together, and it's become sort of this incredible ecosystem that touches everything and everyone. And the whole idea of the framework that Zero Trust brings together is really a concept where we need to be continuously vigilant, continually assessing, continually authorizing. And at the end of the day, from the department, we generally have the moniker of getting the right data to the right people to make the right decisions at the right time. So that's kind of the mindset that we are all in. And the strategy really brings together a lot of the pieces and parts that we have together already in place. So traditionally, we've done pretty well at perimeter defense. But what we struggle with is what's happening inside our infrastructure and our networks. Once we look inside, there's freedom of maneuver. Adversaries can move around, access laterally, gain additional privileges. So this is really getting to the closest point to the user and making that the point of our infrastructure, right? So your network has collapsed to that endpoint. So we start to think about zero trust, and it's kind of interesting, right? Because we talk about zero trust, although we have cleared people and we trust them, but it's really about how do we continually authorize people and authenticate them in a decisive manner that allows us to ensure that they have the right data and information. And the data is really the core and crust of it. So we are starting to really rally around having the department, as we have over the last year or two, about how do you really take all your efforts, initiatives, and really bring them together. Really, this is a massive job at integration. This is about integration of all the capabilities we have, from what do you see on the wire, to the human behavior, to data labeling, all those disparate pockets of things that are already ongoing. This is really about collectively bringing them together in a single view and saying, I see all of it together. So that's kind of the big, broad thing, right? And at the end, zero trust isn't necessarily the perfect answer either, right? As we know in cybersecurity, this is going to be a place where this is a continuous journey, continuous evolution. Can't let your foot off the gas. It is going to require a lot of investment, be it human capital, be it actual resources, but a lot of it is already in place. So I think we're encouraging people to really think differently about how do they use all of the capabilities they have in place. So identity management, that's a big problem. So I generally look at the 7 pillars, and people often ask, where do we start? I think we start with inventory, knowing what you have from your human resources to your devices to your connections, right? You got to have a full, rich inventory of what you have in place. And then you really get to a place where what are the foundational components as we walk down the pillars? So in my view, right, we start with looking at identity and we look at our data. And then the third one we often talk about that we don't use effectively is how do you have effective visibility inside your infrastructure? And what is really going on inside? And so it's the monitoring and censoring bit, right? And how do you then orchestrate responses and automate those kind of things? So a lot of it is about efficiency, but really this is about fundamental things that we have known for a long time. How do you take this incredibly disparate global enterprise all the way from the core to the edge, which is very, very disconnected to some extent, federate your identities, federate your data, and then allow access when they need it, as they need it. So I think that's the mindset we have to have. It's really about that integrated view, and then understanding the value of your data, understanding how do you want to operate, and what risks are you assuming along that journey. So a lot of our decisions within the department aren't that we're going to institute perfect cybersecurity. This is really about having really good technical prowess, understanding what solutions do you need to implement, how do you implement them, integrate them. But at the end of the day, it is a risk decision, and I think that applies for all DoD and the corporate world. So I'll stop
Thanks.
there.
Hey, thanks for that. And there's a lot there I want to dig into a little bit later, but let's we're going to go down the line here. Let's go to Neal next. And so from your vantage point, the Cybersecurity Directorate at NSA, of course, you're a part of DoD, but you also reach out, especially to a lot of our industry partners in the room that are part of the DIB, and helping them with their cybersecurity. What's your take on the Zero Trust architecture?
So Gurpreet covered a lot of the sort of foundational points I was going to try to cover. That's okay. I like to tell people that Zero Trust architecture is a model and a structure that helps you focus on protecting your data, both getting the right data to the people that are authorized and ensuring that unauthorized entities can't get to it, right? So whether you're in a huge government organization like the DoD, or you're in a business, or even a place like a university, Zero Trust gives you that structure that helps you understand what do I need to do to protect my data, and keep visibility on it, monitor it, all those things, and then help plan out your investments, whether it's investments in people or processes, or you're actually buying stuff. It can help you organize those things so that you don't end up with gaps or redundancies, and you know that you are following a structure that's going to be effective. And NSA is trying to help folks with that, right? We're publishing guidance about each of the pillars. DoD's model of Zero Trust is organized in 7 pillars, so we're going to have a paper about each of those. I think we've got 2 or 3 of them out the door by now. And that's helping from our experience modeling this in the lab, studying it for decades, helping to give practical guidance on implementation. So I have a bunch of other things I'd like to say later, but we'll get to them in the other questions.
Thanks. And Steve, down to you.
Thank you, and it's interesting coming up last on this one because
Sorry
we covered
about
all
that.
the fun topics. But I want to pick up on some of the key points that Gurpreet and Neal made, and it's not about throwing out the babies with the bathwater. You already have much of the infrastructure, much of the tools. It's how you approach them, and I think one of the key things around Zero Trust is that it's not a whole revolution. It's not like we're going to start from scratch and just start all over again. Security over the last 20, 30 years has actually been an evolutionary thing. And if you look at going way back to the early days of access control and PKI, and you just look at the different, what we thought were revolutions, when you started talking about concentric circles of security, he's talked about risk-based, which is one of the more recent ones, they all build on each other. And Zero Trust builds on that foundation. And I think what's interesting is what Zero Trust really does, and I think Gurpreet really hit on it, it is a way of focusing those independent activities and bringing them together. We've done, we did firewalls. Okay, that was important. We did access control. That was important. We started doing monitoring. So we've done all these things sometimes in silos. Maybe we were lucky and some of them connected to each other, but they were in silos. And I think one of the evolutionary things around Zero Trust is bringing them together, both to drive the actual policies as well as the implementations of those processes, and having them linked together from the get-go. There's also a revolutionary part, and it's the word that Gurpreet used, continuous. And you see it all over the documentation: continuous monitoring, authentication, continuous authorization, continuous policy, continuous update. That continuous is the revolutionary word that takes us to the next level. And I think as we look at why Zero Trust is so important, is it moves us from the static mode to the dynamic. And that's the aha moment of Zero Trust. So Zero Trust, this evolution, is linking all of our stuff together and really trying to coordinate from the edge to the core to the edge, depending on the direction you're looking at, and protecting the data. The revolutionary step is making those determinations, making those policies, making those events dynamic. So number one, it can change based on the events of the moment. And today and tomorrow different. The cyber threat landscape will be different. The role of the individual could be different. What the data, its sensitivity could be different. And relying on static policies or static controls is not going to be able to meet those changing threats. And that's the revolutionary part of Zero Trust, is that shift to continuous, that shift to dynamic. But again, the other point to make is it's not like we have to start from scratch. We already have much of the infrastructure. We have much of the visibility. We're just not leveraging it yet or fully implementing it to its full capability. You have a firewall, but we've left it at the perimeter. As Neal and Gurpreet mentioned, it's getting down to that device or to that user. So minimizing and maximizing that firewall or that firewall concept, if you will, to the actual event, to the transaction, as opposed to the whole perimeter. So it's about reducing the area of the surface area of attack and applying those dynamic policies. And that's really where we look at this journey that we're all on around Zero Trust. It's how do I implement that? How do I get that to scale are going to be some of the key challenges as we start moving along that path.
Okay. Well, let's stick with you, Steve. We'll go into the next question. Talking about the journey that you take, what are some of those initial steps? Again, thinking, our program name is Zero Trust with Zero Budget. What you already have in your network that you don't need to spend perhaps more. Maybe you just need to flip a switch or do something. What are some of those initial steps that you might recommend to one of your clients or someone you're working with on how to really start down that journey for a strong Zero Trust approach?
So it's a very good question, John. And I have to say that some of the starting points aren't the sexy parts of Zero Trust. It's not advanced analytics and AI applied to modeling. Number one is visibility. And what is the first part of visibility? Gurpreet said it. Asset identification, asset management. You cannot secure what you don't know. So bare bones, start with your asset management. Know what devices and systems and networks you have that you're trying to manage. And oftentimes, it's not the security team that has that data. I'm sure they have their own asset management database, and it's going to be incomplete. But procurement knows what you've bought because they had to pay for it and they have to capitalize it. That information exists inside the enterprise, whether you're a government agency or you're a private industry. It's the collaboration between finance, in this case, finance and operations and security, because they know what systems have been bought because it's on the books. Whether they paid for it 20 years ago, they're still depreciating it. So you have information that you can glean to understand what systems you have. You have monitoring in place that's monitoring your network. Gleaning that information, understand the transactions, understand the networks that you're supporting, understand the accounts that you have at external services. That's step one. You have to know what's in your environment in order to be able to start to create policies, create security controls, and create the implementation of access control and all of these things. The second one is, again, not the sexiest, but it's actually something you probably already have and are not taking advantage of, is segmentation. Micro-segmentation. I know it's a scary word for network operators, but the switches and routers and software-defined networks you have already have this functionality and had it for years. Making the network as small as possible by drawing these really small lines around the functional units, the branch offices, the domains, even the carving up offices, allows you to reduce the area that, number one, from a surface area perspective, it's a smaller attack surface, but also allows you to apply policies specific to that environment. And this is where Zero Trust is really, starts to shine if you do this. Because the idea is to have as minimal amount of policy per transaction, so you can control exactly what's supposed to happen there. Well, if you have like systems being lumped together, then you can create a common policy and not have to create exceptions that then become a problem downstream. And so implementing microsegmentation early, and it's going to break some things, I guarantee you. Usually it's going to be once a year when someone tries to run a report and can't access the 40 systems they thought they have, but it's better to implement it now and figure out what things you have to do to accommodate as opposed to leaving everything open. And so I'd say those two first things have got to be foundational. Even honestly, and I know this is going to be contrarian, before you get to multi-factor authentication. You should get there, don't get me wrong. But you have to know what you're securing, and you have to be able to reduce the networks down to a manageable size so that you can apply access control policy. You can apply the kind of controls in a more rational way that allows you to do continuous authorization and be able to do specific policies for those domains. So I've always picked those two as the starting point. And then from there, there's lots of good things you can do beyond, whether it's multi-factor authentication, continuous monitoring, also being able to create a secure foundation. And this is something that often gets neglected until way down the line, because there seems like there are more important things to do. But it's one of the things that you already have the capability for. If you've bought a server in the last 15 years, you've got this capability. You bought a client in the last 10, you have this capability. Turn on Secure Boot, just flip the switch.
Yeah.
It's in the BIOS, it's already there. You have the capability. What that does is it gives you a solid foundation that you know that when that system booted up, it was good. It may not be good 20 minutes later, that's other controls, but you know you're starting from a known good state. And that means that the additional security controls you're going to put on all the things we'll probably talk about for the next hour, start on a secure foundation. And it's one of those things you don't have to spend any extra money, usually. I mean, there's some legacy floating around there. But these systems have been available for years, for almost over a decade. They are in your infrastructure, they're in your clouds, they're in your laptops. If you're using Microsoft, it's one of the requirements. So just turn it on, and you'll start adding to the overall security. And again, from a zero trust perspective, it doesn't require you to do anything more than that, just to test that it's there and it's on. And then your policies can take advantage of it. So when we start looking at the pillars like device and network, and you having that secure infrastructure becomes part of the credential. I'm Steve authenticating to this network from a trusted device. And again, it's one of those things that doesn't cost you really anything extra. And those are some of the guidance that we've been giving and that I've been hearing from CISOs is making the biggest difference as they take on the larger challenges of the complexity of zero trust.
Okay, let's go to Neal. So Neal, you said NSA's putting out papers that look at all the 7 pillars. Do any of them have what Steve just said as part of the guidance?
Yeah, actually they do. Steve mentioned really important activities that you can do right from the beginning in the networking and infrastructure pillar, right? That would be things like segmentation, even microsegmentation. And then having basic trust in your devices, right? That's part of the device pillar. Those are 2 that are right early in our list. The device pillar guidance paper is already out, and networking and infrastructure is done. It's just kind of still almost through the publication process to get out the door. And but I'm going to turn briefly to the user pillar. And I'm going to disagree slightly with Steve because I really think the user pillar is one of those ones that you should do right from the beginning. And it's also one of those ones where you probably have all the infrastructure you need already in place that would allow you to at least get the basic level of capability. Most zero trust architectures, and certainly the DoD model, have like basic, intermediate, and advanced, right? Do basic first. And you almost certainly have the technology to do that already, right? If you're using any modern operating system or cloud service from the last decade or so, it supports multiple forms of multi-factor authentication. You can choose the one that works best for your enterprise, right? In DoD, of course, we all have CAC cards, so we can rely on that. But if you're a business, you may not have that, so you may want to rely on something else. That's okay. Right? Just getting off username and password is a huge step. Next, kind of back to, you can't secure what you don't know. You got to know who all those entities are, and that's part of inventory. Right? You know who your people are, presumably, but one of the things you'll find out is that you may have some big corporate network, all the people there, but there are little ancillary networks. You got to know the people that are there too. So what are those users? And then once you're working on the device pillar, you can now start getting into the non-person entities of these device identities and inventory those. Okay? Well, now you know what's in your network, and you can start applying policy to those things, like all users of this type must use multi-factor authentication. Many enterprises start with their administrators. If they're not already doing multi-factor, it's like, okay, where's the biggest bang for my buck as I start to invest? It's controlling those privileged administrators, getting them protected first, because an attacker is going to go after those identities because it gives them the most capability once they're attacking you. So let's say that you've done your inventory, you know what you're dealing with, you want to know where to go next. I would say Network and infrastructure pillar is a good possibility. User pillar, also a good possibility. And you pick those controls, you apply them at the basic level, and then make sure, back to what Gurpreet said, that they are being applied continuously, right? Not just done as a one-shot, but done continuously, and that applies to inventory as well. So I'll sort of finish with that. You got to know what's in your network. That's got to be continuous knowledge that you maintain. You almost certainly have the business processes and the technology to do that. You just got to use it, make sure it's being applied consistently.
Great. Gurpreet, so we've heard about asset management, monitoring, microsegmentation, inventories as some things that are don't require a lot of, they require time and attention, but they don't require a major financial type of resource. Are there any other existing capabilities and practices that you would want to highlight that you can leverage to help transition to zero trust?
Yeah, so I think all the stuff that just talked about, really, really important and relatively straightforward to do, right? So some of this, from a DoD perspective, right, we also talk about zero trust as not necessarily a technology problem solely. This is a cultural change, right? And how do we bring about that evolution and change is really looking holistically across how do we leverage technology, how do we have the right skill sets in place, how do we have trained personnel, how do we have accountability on the wire, right? People are touching all kinds of information and roaming our infrastructure. How do we have accountability at the end of the day? So I think it's much more than just technology. So I think there are a lot of things we are focused on within the department is making sure that we have the right policies, thinking about what does accountability really mean in cyberspace, right? So what's the end user accountability? And I think it's unprecedented in the department at least to have a deputy secretary or secretary talk about zero trust. I call that a killer app, right? I mean, in 25 years, I've never heard that level acknowledge the fact that this is really a revolution that's going to help us safeguard our infrastructure, our weapon systems, our OT, IT, right? So this is really getting after our entire infrastructure. So really that process, the governance, the training, those are really just as critical pieces to this puzzle as they are as you look at your SIEM or SOAR solutions or you want to optimize your analytics. So one of the big things we have noticed is insider threat, right? And that is an incredibly massive problem. So people think about insider threats and they go, well, what am I going to do about insider threat? How do I get after that? I think the pieces are in place. We all have some user activity monitoring tools. We have some behavior analytics already on. This is really about empowering and integrating the two together, right? So if I have a tip that goes to somewhere and it just sits there and there's no action taken, it's kind of mindless. So it goes back to the integration, right? So if you have user behavior, and we're in a space where remote work is common, right? So we're going to need to not sort of be stuck in our ways of you're within a boundary, understand you are here, geographic access, right? We're basically in a space where geographic boundaries are kind of not there anymore. So we got to be able to understand how people are accessing, what are the patterns, and a lot of this is optimization at the end about how do we analyze that data, how do we look at that data, how do we consume that data, and not just in terabytes of logs, but really looking at how do you build profiles and patterns that allow you to make quick decisions, either a human decision, a tipping, or AI-enabled decision that allows you to take action. And we're never going to get away from the fact that you're going to have an incident on your infrastructure.
Eventually.
So you got to be able to have the visibility. You got to have a place where you can rely on the information you're seeing and tipping and queuing rapidly, and then fast action. So a lot of this is really about knowing what is happening within your wire and then being able to take some action to minimize the impact. Because the adversaries are going to get in, and they're going to be able to roam to some extent. The goal from our end is really that being able to respond and then recover from that incident quickly. And right now, I think we're noticing a lot of lot of components within the department really getting good at understanding when things are anomalous on their infrastructure. So I think that recognition and understanding how to really get after quickly responding and curbing that data loss is really critical. So I think those are some additional things we could do in the near term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So the insider threat, that's always a tough one to work. But that leads me to this next question of sort of the identity verification piece. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the tools that might be available for that you might already have in your existing infrastructure that you could bring to bear?
So I think everybody has identity management system, right? I think the foundational things we often talk about are really having multi-factor authentication in place, avoiding sort of connections, right? Random connections without comply to connect, which is really a way for us to make sure that we are following the rigor to be able to connect and know what's connected on the wire. So from an identity perspective, I think I'll talk about not the tools that we have. I think this is really a problem that we have in Zero Trust, and how do we want to collapse this ecosystem and have users authenticate and validate across the globe, right? So we talk about, in identity management, we talk about federation of identities, right? And that's just not within the DoD, but how do we federate identities with our federal civil partners? How do we federate identities with our critical infrastructure, with our DIB and other allies across the globe? So I think those are some of the big things that we're thinking through in terms of identity management. I think existing tools are already in place. You pick your favorite vendor, and I'm pretty sure everybody has incredible amount of tools. And I think this is really about how do you start to think about simplistic things. So what are for us, a challenge maybe, what are the enterprise level attributes that we can all agree to authenticate users? Is it valid for me to have an enterprise level supervisor where a individual moves between services and they're going to have 17 identities as they go across the service and agency and joint force? How do I have that authoritative source of record that can allow me to validate? Even simple things like how do I have my training records validated, that I've taken my information assurance training, annual training. So I think those are some of the things that we're thinking through holistically. How do you improve and integrate and have visibility across the identity platform rather than the tool? So our goal from the DoD is at the CIO level is not to prescribe a tool, or right. We're saying that you need to have these kind of controls in place and these integrated views across the board. And integration isn't just the vertical integration of you go down the data pillar and the user pillar and across the board. It's really the horizontal breaking across. That's the hard part of it, right? And that's where the training and the skills really come into play, is how do you integrate those capabilities?
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what we've talked about, this idea of low-hanging fruit. And especially if you have limited resources and you wanted to use some of your financial resources to start to do help you in your Zero Trust journey, where would you point somebody first? If you've done some of we've talked about things that might not cost a lot of money, like inventory and stuff. But if you started to, where do you think you get your bang for the buck or the low-hanging fruit? And we'll start with you, Neal.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to something that Steve said, because I really think this is low-hanging fruit that already exists in all our enterprises and can be applied within our networks with very little disruption. And that is the network segmentation and the associated visibility and monitoring. Okay? So think about it. You've got routers and switches and firewalls and gateways are in your network today. All those devices have the ability to help you. They all have the ability to monitor data flows. And in my view, that's kind of a piece of inventory as well. If you understand the data flows that exist day to day in your enterprise, then you can create policy. You can say, okay, I can see where my data flows are going, so I've got a segment here and a segment here and a segment here. I'm going to set up policy about the data flows that need to cross between those segments. So think about it. You have these routers and switches that you have in your network today. Doesn't matter what vendor, they all do it. They can create net flow monitoring records. It's a well understood technology. There's plenty of tools out there for analyzing it. Some of them are open source and free. And so you can start collecting that data. Turn it on, collect it in an aggregator, analyze it. You will start to understand the key data flows in your enterprise. Then you can create those segments. Like Steve said, all these devices have the ability to enforce at least basic segmentation and probably much more. Now you're off to the races, right? You're watching your network, you're getting that visibility, and you're applying policy. Once you have that, you'll probably have exceptions, things that, oh, once a year this exceptional thing needs to happen. You have to have in place processes to recognize when that happens and respond to it. And those are the same processes that you'll use, and you'll start building up that muscle memory when you have a compromise. Because a compromise can be viewed as an exception that you never authorized, okay? But if you can catch those exceptions, you can spot them, you can react to them. That doesn't take any new money either, because the devices, here's a very simple example. It kind of goes back to what Gurpreet was saying about users, right? You have an identity management system and probably a directory and a way of assigning users privileges, simple ones right now. Let's say that you discover that a user has been compromised and they're now under the control, they're probably on vacation, and some piece of malware is controlling their account. If you have these processes in place, you can quickly take all privileges away from that user and then disable their account. That should be the activity at a basic level. That should take minutes. At an advanced level, you might start automating it. It might take only seconds, but let's stay at basic for a moment. Exercise those processes, and you will be able to respond to compromises more quickly using technology that's already in your network.
Thank you. By the way, we're getting some really great questions here. Keep them coming. I'm going to ask one more. Let Steve comment here, and then we'll go to audience questions. So keep them coming.
Well, you're taking all the good answers here.
Well, I riffed off your answer.
So absolutely, the network is one of those things that you already have an investment in. I think another one, and this goes to something that Gurpreet mentioned around the attributes and that horizontal. So again, you start with the basics. You have your visibility, you've done some network, you've got your access control. What's that next big thing? And I want to talk about, it's really around a term we haven't used yet. It's one of the more controversial terms that started out the whole zero trust conversation, default deny. So I'll say that together, default deny, scary. It's not as scary as you think. It just means that you're starting to, from a perspective of you don't have access. Prove you get access. And let me give you a practical example. I'm the CTO of the Federal Division. I have ridiculous access to data if I want it. I have to ask for it. Even on the corporate network, if I want to access a document with a specification, not only do I have to, I've authenticated. I've done my multi-factor. I go to a document that I have not accessed before, automatic access denied. I have to request access. Type in a justification and wait for somebody to approve it. The author or the curator of the data controls that. That is a simple process we've built in place to help deal with the fact that I do need access, so it's not like you're blocking me forever, but it's not an automated access, and it's sort of switching that model. And then we take that and marry it to the next piece, which I want to talk about those attributes, and this is where the horizontal really starts to shine. If you take a data-centric view of security, as opposed to a user-centric or a device-centric, you talk about, it's about the data I'm accessing, and then use the attributes of the enterprise. What are those attributes? The user, me. The device, when am I on accessing it? The network, where am I accessing it from? And actually add to that network geolocation. Where am I physically, whether it's through a physical authentication because I badged in the building or my device GPS. And then what am I trying to access? You put those together as a credential of the moment, and you make a determination. And I'll give you a practical example. I've used this one publicly. It's an amalgamation of a couple different policies. If I'm on my cell phone, I can get my email through multi-factor authentication and encrypted VPN. I'm able to get my email. I can't get attachments unless I go to a special container. I can't get design specs. I can't get the financials. I have to be on the corporate network, on my corporate device to get those level of information. I can't get the chip layout even on the corporate network from my office. I'd have to be in the room, in the fab, with appropriate physical access controls to get the chip layout. Even though I have, from an authority on the role I have, I could see those things, but I can't see them unless I'm in the physical location. It's taking a data-centric security. It has nothing to do with my access control. I'm allowed, well, from a role perspective, but I'm not in the right location or on the right system or on the right network for that transaction. So it's about a data-centric security with that default deny built in, so that when you do that authentication, you're authenticating not just the user, you're authenticating, and we call it the W's. Who am I? What am I on? What am I connecting on? What am I connecting to? Where am I? And why? And when you put those attributes together, which, by the way, come from all the pillars, so device, user, network, data, and make that part of that continuous authentication credential, I could get access to a document today and not get access to it tomorrow based on where I am, or if I change my device, or if I'm on vacation. I'll give you a funny quick story on this. When we first started implementing this, we wrote a white paper. It's published around this. It was called the Saturn Project because it was concentric circles. We'd created a policy that if you badged into Oregon, you would get all your access and so forth. But if suddenly your account showed up in California or in China or anywhere else, obviously you would get blocked because you should be in Oregon where you badged in. They were tying your physical badge in to your authentication. Well, we had an problem. We actually had a shuttle service between Oregon and California. So you could theoretically be in Oregon in the morning and be in California 2.5 hours later. So we actually had to create a little policy to create the time window there, but to actually deal with that because people were flying down and then getting blocked. But we were doing it, tying the physical access. So when Neal badges in the morning, his account should only be accessing from that building at that time. And being able to tie those two worlds together gives you a richer credential to do that continuous authentication and default deny everything else. Even though he could access something if he was in another location, tying those attributes together is a really big bang for the buck when you start thinking about how do I do default deny without aggravating my user base, is that you make it data-centric and moment-centric, or in the event. So that's the guidance is sort of where do you take your little bit of budget, or even if you have a massive budget like the NSA, where do you spend some dollars to get that bang for money? It's when you start connecting those cross domains in a practical way.
So let me add one little thing. Can I add one thing? Please. No, we had to implement controls like this, maybe not quite as extensive as you're talking about, on many, many, many applications and systems within NSA. And what we found was most cost-effective was to create a centralized, policy information point, and then offer a set of libraries as a policy decision point, so each application author didn't have to write their own. Right, that would be very expensive.
Yeah.
They could just incorporate the corporate library, it talked to the corporate service, and suddenly all these applications, dozens and then later hundreds of them, enforced this policy in a consistent manner and sent the appropriate events to the visibility service so that they were logged in the appropriate manner.
That's a very good point about building that common infrastructure library so that developers don't screw it up every time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to some of our
yesterday, remember?
Yeah. Let's go to some of our audience questions here. The first one, do you have any examples of companies that have successfully implemented a zero trust architecture? What are the metrics that you should be looking at to measure success? And how do you make sure the workforce is properly prepared? So that's an easy one. Let's go to Gurpreet.
Well,
yeah, you already bragged about your company.
so within the department, we don't mandate any zero trust requirements on any company. I think there are a lot of companies that are starting their journeys just like we are. Right? This isn't a one-year journey. This is a multi-year journey, and then sort of evolves from there. So I think there are a lot of companies that are looking at how do they evolve this journey, and I think they're following a similar path as we are in the DoD, right? Really looking at what do they have in place in terms of identity, their data, their intellectual property, and really starting to do that inventory piece. And then really trying to get after how do you take integrated capabilities and start to have that visibility across their infrastructure. So I think cloud is an example where I think we're starting to see a lot of companies, cloud service providers, starting to host their commercial vendors, government vendors, DoD, within their cloud infrastructure, within different tenants. So I think they're applying the rigor of Zero Trust. A lot of them are following, in fact, our model of 91 for the target activities and then 152 for the advanced. So I think there is a plan, and everybody's sort of feverishly working to determine how do they invest in the right things. And a lot of companies, I would presume, are sort of figuring out how to do that integration of their data, their inventory, while they're still looking at their challenges on how do you get to post-quantum, how do you integrate AI as a automated capabilities in terms of their analytics. So I think there is a whole lot of churn happening within the industry and the DoD and across the federal government in terms of their journey. Everybody's sort of taking whatever they think their right investment starting point is. And but I still feel like everybody's sort of at that inventory, looking at how do you draw out the plan, do you have the resource map done to make sure that you can invest in the training. As technology advances, I think all that is also playing in, from going passwordless to how do you grant access remotely. I know that's a big challenge for industry. For us, it is a challenge, but probably not as big. I think our bigger challenge is more of the how do you look at weapon systems that were built in the 1950s? How do you Zero Trust enable them, right? So really, that conversation is extraordinarily hard because we're starting with the conversation about how do you censor and monitor that environment. Or if you go into disconnected environments around the globe, how do you really start to get after those what's called DDoS environments, so really limited access, but you still need access to that data to carry out that mission. So I think bottom line is I think we're all on that journey together, and we are definitely learning from each other in terms of how do you integrate these capabilities, how do you bring about that evolution change and revolutionary change, in fact, and how do you leverage existing capabilities in different ways. And we're all facing the same threat vectors at the end of the day.
Okay. Any ideas on success you want to spotlight or the metrics piece? Or?
I'll try to mention something that's totally different, a little bit anyway. And that's, I've talked to a number of critical infrastructure companies about this, like power, oil, gas, those kind of companies. They face slightly different challenges, although I kind of feel for them on their legacy infrastructure, right? Because we have that too. And what some of them have done is they've started from their corporate network, which tends to be more modern. It's enterprise. It has user control and all that stuff, and then work outward towards their operational technology. And at each step of the way, having some set of basic controls, they say, hey, we're going to consistently apply these, whether it's network segmentation or basic device and user control. And I think that's a reasonable strategy. If you have some part of your network that is the sort of the most modern or the most controlled today, okay, start with that. That's going to be the quickest. And then you can work outward and make sure that if you've really secured this inner part, that it controls what trust it has in those outer parts that have not yet been secured.
So I want to hit on a couple points from the question. Number one, it's a journey. As everyone has said, it's a journey. So there's not a company that has achieved Zero Trust. It is a path. It's a journey. So we're all working to achieve greater levels of Zero Trust. You have Zero Trust today. Might be a little teeny bit, but everyone's got some Zero Trust. It's how do we continue to evolve it and grow it and scale it. So I want to start with that, and then looking at another word from that question, which is the metrics, the methodology. You asked what metrics are we using. The step one is have metrics that you can use. When you start planning your Zero Trust journey, build into the deployment, the processes, the policies, the instrumentation so that you can measure whether it be successes, whatever those look like, or more importantly, number of exceptions. If you're seeing a lot of exceptions on a specific data, that tells you the policy may need to be updated. So those metrologies are not just, well, I have a nice dashboard that shows me green all day long, but it's leveraging those metrics to evolve you and to focus where you go. And to make improvements, continuous monitoring, you need to have the metrics. So it's important to measure. The other side of it, this is less to do with technology or even security, is at the end of the day, year over year, we're going to have to go back to our procurement and budget for the next round of zero trust stuff we have to do. So having some metrics to show year over year, we've done X, Y, Z better than the year before, whether it be we've reduced cost, we've increased the number of events that were handled, whatever those metrics are going to be useful for your you're actually the not fun part of the job, which is making sure you have budget for zero trust next year. So metrology is going to be super important. And then lastly, you talked about educate, and I know everyone thinks, well, we have to educate everyone on zero trust. No. Well, some. But I think one thing is as we implement these processes and these policies that are going to change the way they do business or the way they access things, is educate them on that. Expect to get denied. Don't let it be a surprise to anyone. Let them know, and then let them know the exception process. Or in my case, what's the process I need to have to write, make sure I know my justification. Educate them on the practicality of zero trust, as opposed to the, thou shalt not do this, don't click on links, which we've been doing for years and obviously hasn't
See how
helped.
well that's worked,
Yeah. Educate them on what you are doing, how the environment's changing. Let them be part of the process, but also let them know that when they need that email at the that file and they can't get it, they're not left scrambling and yelling and screaming and escalating, which causes friction. Give them education on what they do in those events, or when they find themselves on a network that doesn't have access, what they need to do. Give them the information, and you'll find your workforce is much more amenable to the bumps that you're going to experience along the way.
If I can add
please.
onto that point, right? It's a really important point for us. We have swung all the way from what we call need to know to need to share, right? And we've gone all open, and need to share really trumps everything today. So I think the pendulum is going to swing back a little in terms of who gets access to what data. And that's part of the challenge, right? There will be a little bit of growing pain from users as well in terms of understanding what is it that they need, and when do they need it, and why do they need that information, right? So I think there's going to be that evolution of how do we get to a space where we have a really balanced approach of the need to know and the need to share, right? We want to collaborate. That's sort of our mantra today. But I think in a very controlled manner, for lack of a better word, right? So that's a really important concept. And a second point on the metrics, the way we are within the department really thinking about metrics, we were thinking about adoption. So how do we measure adoption? So we have mandated from the Zero Trust PFMO that every component within the DoD will submit an implementation plan. So we just went through the first round of looking at all their integration plan that talks about how are they going to meet the first target level goal for FY27, which includes not just the technology bit, but also are they resourced? Do they have enough resources to really get to the end game? And some of this is really the discussion really then goes to what are enterprise level services or efficiencies that you can have, and products that you want to buy versus what are localized. So I think that is how we're managing and monitoring. And at the end of the day, the DoD CIO will take all those implementation plans and work with all of the components to make sure that they are drudging along. So lots of checkpoints along the way. And at the end, he's responsible for validating those implementation plans, to saying you have met your zero trust goal. So we're outlining the conditions of what does goodness look like when you submit your zero trust compliance plan. So that's how we're tracking. So it is along the technology road, it's along the integration road, it is along the resourcing road, it is along any process and governance road. So we're making all the components come back together with a holistic approach and really informing them of the threats, right? That's a really important piece that we often miss, is that a lot of times we assume, right? So if we work at an IC agency, we assume we know the threat, but it's not prevalent throughout. So I think it's really important to educate people on why we're on this journey and why is it really important for them to be vigilant, just like we're trying to be vigilant.
Thanks.
Good one.
Okay, new question. I'm going to give this one to you, Neal.
Okay.
It says, we trust a lot of corporate software, most of which is closed source. How does Zero Trust address this. So the use of software you might not know what's in the code.
Okay, thank you to whoever asked that question. That is a tough question, right? We depend on software, and we can't avoid that, right? We have to depend on databases and directory services and cloud services. So and we actually had a whole thing we published out of ESF. I know you worked on it a great deal. I worked on a little on software assurance, so that's out there. But three things you got to think about when you're saying, hey, I'm going to depend on this software as part of my Zero Trust implementation. The first one is, do you have trustworthy channels for bringing in that software from whoever created it, probably some business partner or supplier, bringing it into your enterprise so that you preserve the trust you had in that supplier, right? Maybe you're validating signatures, have a trusted channel for receiving it. You got to have that. The second one is to understand how it fits in to the Zero Trust structure in your enterprise, right? Can it perform its own, say, user and attribute-based access control? Or does it need some help from a corporate gateway or system or library to help it do that? And then thirdly, can it generate the necessary visibility and monitoring events or streams or what have you that you need as part of your policy, saying, well, certain types of activities within my enterprise, I am always going to monitor them. You look at the software, does it have that stuff? If you can kind of check those three boxes, you're in a really good start, and you can repose, I think, some trust in that software. If you can't, at least now you know what the gaps are, and you can work with the supplier or work with your developers within your enterprise to address those gaps. And I love this topic. I could talk about it all day, but I'm going to hand it back to you, John, in the interest of time.
Yeah, because we've got lots of questions, and we'll try to get as many as we can here. Three that are all sort of on the same topic, which is cross-domain. So one is, can you point to an example of Zero Trust that is truly cross-domain, especially open internet, NIPR, SIPR, JWICs? There's another, how do you view implementation of Zero Trust in a multi-domain or cross-domain environment? How does that work? And is it possible to implement across multi-domains? So Neal looks disturbed with this question, so I'll ask.
I'm hoping Gurpreet will go first, because I need thinking time.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go. Gurpreet?
I think as we think about cross-domain solutions, right, they certainly have a place. So I don't think of cross-domains just as as we would call them north-south, right? Mm-hmm. So going between the classification domains, which we have very traditionally thought about. So cross-domain, as I start to think about in the functionality sense, right, it serves a very specific purpose of making sure that I keep the bad stuff out and I have trust in what I'm sort of sending across the wires to the other side. I think my thought process, and I think about the use cases, right? Within the department, I think it's probably reasonably okay to, and I think our thought is mature on the cross-domain solutions. I think when we start to think about environments like cloud environments that we are standing up and we have lots of allies that we want to integrate and do mission with across the globe, how do you start to minimize that risk, right? So I think of this as the threat vectors that I'm going to be exposed to, which may be compounded by the fact that I'm allowing somebody in my environment or to share something in my environment that is unbeknownst to me, right? So I think about sort of what is that baggage that they're going to bring with them. So every individual partner, for instance, if I want to have a multinational environment where I want to put lots of allies and partners to conduct a mission, how do I minimize the threat? What are my mechanisms for really sharing that data, collaborating with those partners, executing my mission, but not burdened by lots and lots of technology that's going to filter and slow down, right? It's a trading game, right? So right now, I think, as we think about cross-domain, that is a trusted, proven way of how do you get after that problem. We haven't gotten to a place where I can say, software separation is good enough, right? So I think this is a space where we are starting to evolve our thinking a little bit. And I think from our vantage point within the department, at least from a CIO, cross domains are going to persist for a little while, right? They serve a very purpose-driven answer at the end of the day, and that really is in conjunction with how do you think about all the other capabilities that you need, right? So as you think about the function, it is really helping you look at the threat vectors and the risks that you are imposing within the environment that you're in. So I don't want to say that cross domains only at the boundary or within the boundary. I think it's really truly based on what are you facing in terms of the threat vectors and the risk. But at the end of the day, you also need agility and flexibility to be able to execute in a timely way.
Let me pose a slightly different mental model that has been helping us think about how cross-domain fits in with zero trust. And this has come up at NSA a lot because we work a lot in zero trust, and we also work a lot in cross-domain, host the National Cross-Domain Management Office. So from a zero trust framework, think of a cross-domain solution as kind of an extreme form of segmentation, right? You have information domains in which you repose a very great difference in their level of trust, like maybe one is unclassified and one is top secret, very big difference, or one is a US network and one is a allies network, right? They're different sovereign nations, very different. So a cross-domain solution allows you to impose a policy bottleneck where you're only allowing certain forms of information that meet very strict requirements to come in, pass across the domain boundary, and go back out. So you can control what's done there. You can impose whatever policies and controls you need to apply. And if you think of it that way, it fits very naturally into the mental model of zero trust. And then you say, well, I got to do all the other things I need to zero trust. I'm going to have to monitor it. I'm going to have to ensure that it has device integrity. And then if I can assure all those things, it fits in the structure.
Okay. Hey, I got at least a few more questions I want to get in here. And we'll give this one we'll start with Steve. What does industry, or what can industry do to help the government move to zero trust more effectively?
That's a big question. So let's start with.
You have a minute.
Yeah, it is.
I have a minute. Okay. I'm going to put it into 3 buckets. So number one is, and it goes to something that Neal mentioned earlier around software, but it's more holistic than that. And this is for all of us, myself included, in industry. Build our tools to help enable the government to adopt zero trust. Don't wait for the customer to say, oh, I need this, I need that. Build it in, whether it be the monitoring, support for multi-factor authentication, being able to work on a micro-segmented environment without having to pop out the 40 different networks. Building in some of those capabilities from the get-go to enable the adoption into a zero trust based architecture will go a long way. Providing visibility. I'm going to say the word I was expecting you to say, SBOM. The 4 letters are very important. I'm going to channel Alan Friedman here. SBOM, software bill of materials, is a way to get visibility into what's in the box so that you can do a better job of assurance and then apply zero trust policies, whether it be network segmentation, what have you, to a product. As industry, we need to be proactive in providing that visibility to our government customers. So that's one is build our products to meet those needs and requirements without waiting for them to come in. Don't wait for the contract to say I need zero trust, because it will take 6 months to 2 years to build that capability. Build it in now. 2, as we're all industry-wide on this journey around zero trust, is share best practices. And this is for everyone, industry, government, academia. We share best practices. We've spent a lot of time as an industry trying to share vulnerability information and indicators of compromise. We don't share enough good things. So when you implement zero trust, or if you've adopted multi-factor authentication for containers in a cloud with this database, share your best practice. Show how you did it and how it succeeded. Show the metrics of what you were able to achieve. Share that information with your partners, with the industry, with government, and vice versa, government share with industry, which many of you are doing. That collaboration will help us all achieve better zero trust, because we're all using a lot of the same things. We're using the same cloud providers. We're using a lot of the same software stacks. Our networks are not that dissimilar. It may be, regulated data versus classified data, but we're all being challenged by the same thing. So that's second is share. And third is along the lines, is sort of a follow-on for that is educating your own internal workforces so that when they're working with the government, we're speaking the same languages. So make sure that you're not just your technical resources, but your sales resources if you're an industry player. Your IT, bring them along. Let them talk to government about what their challenges are. And so that cross-education raises all boats because we're all learning on the fly here as we're trying to figure out how to do this and how to scale this. So again, 3 things: build better products, share how you're deploying it, and then let's educate everyone so that we're all talking together and not talking at each other.
Great, thanks. Hey, this one's for...
Can I add to that too?
Okay.
I think I think we talk about public-private partnership a lot, right? And I think it's really important in this space, especially to have a really tight-knit partnership. So what we traditionally do within the department, right? We are a great consumer of individual products, and then we hire large integrators to integrate those, which is an incredibly massive challenge for us in Zero Trust, right? So if you look at the 91 activities, that's just cumbersome and really complex. So what would be really helpful is, as we have outlined all the activities and the controls and the things we want to achieve as an outcome, what we would love from industry is really more of an integrated set of capabilities. So don't just give me hey, I'm going to give you a single piece of identity, or here's the schema for labeling your, right? Help us understand and thread multiple capabilities together. We're not great at integration, right? That's why we have large integrators. So I think helping along that journey of thinking about integrated capabilities, how do you quickly adopt them? How do you train to use them, really, at the end of the day? Really is that power of the individual being able to sort of go from between different skill sets and say, I can now have a SOC quickly stood up with people that can quickly, within a day or two, really understand how to use the power of what they're seeing on their screen. That's really important for us. The other thing is, we don't have today a trusted way to consume capabilities for Zero Trust. In the last year and a half, I don't know how many vendors have come up and said, I have the Zero Trust answer for you. And I don't know how to, I mean, maybe they do, right? I just don't know how to consume it. So there isn't a sandbox, a checkbox, or a lab that says, hey, I'm going to validate these capabilities, and they really, kind of like NIAP, right? They really meet the intent, and they meet the functionality and the security and all the requirements that would constitute meeting those activities or controls. So that is something that is also missing. So that would be interesting to kind of understand, what does industry think about? How do you validate and make those solutions available in an integrated way, in a validated fashion? Our job is to really look at how do you scale those, how do you make sure that they're secure from a software code development perspective. So how do you provide that? I think that would be really interesting. And then the last bit is really innovation. We have been incredibly careful not to prescribe solutions, to say, hey, we want to fit this solution into this box, into this paradigm. So I think we would love to figure out, how does industry deliver that innovation and plug and play solutions where we can innovate as threats evolve. So that's really the place where we would love to have industry engage more.
I'd like to add one thing. I think the NIST NCCOE is going to be the right place for that. Let's validate that this stuff actually does what it says it does. And that may be a really good, throw a pointer over there and get them to set up an interoperability validation project for the Zero Trust solutions that you're seeing. And I think that's the kind of thing they do there. So that would be a really good use of their time.
Great. Hey, this question, I'm going to give this one to you as well, Gurpreet, which is something I've been thinking about. Can you describe the intersection of Zero Trust with CMMC? It's a humorous topic.
So CMMC is still in rulemaking, so I won't be able to comment on CMMC specifically. I think when people talk about CMMC, I take a step back to see, how do we really have a defense industrial base that is shored up for what we need, right? And are we handling and protecting the information that we need? Mm-hmm. And that really goes to the core of the NIST requirements that we already have in place, right? So the NIST 800-171 requirements that are already in place, I think that's that's really where we want to focus. So this is about 2 steps, right? One is really about how do you implement those controls, and how do both parties really essentially have the trust and assurance that both sides are complying and protecting and applying that same rigor. Yeah, I mean, CMMC is still in rulemaking. In fact, it's still open for public comment. Encourage everyone to provide their feedback and comments before that closes.
Any other comments down here? Okay. We have another question here about data. So data is one of the 7 pillars. And the question is, data is the heart of everything, enterprise IT. Can you talk a little bit more about how most federal agencies are tackling this pillar, from data classification to access control and rights management?
I'll start on that one. So this is something where NSA has substantial experience, right? We have a lot of mission data, and it's been a long journey for us, but we're really quite good at marking it and then controlling. We used to have a saying back when we were working on this in the old days, when I was working on it directly: mark the data, trust the marking. In other words, not trust it in the zero trust sense, but trust it in the terms of use that marking to help control the data. So the way you have to think about marking your data is understanding what forms of policy control you need to apply to that data, right? Classification is a really easy one, so that was kind of obvious. You know, secret, top secret, confidential, unclassified. But there's a whole bunch of others that are going to depend on your particular business structure or your particular role in government, right? NSA, we're a SIGINT agency. There are a lot of policy and legal controls on SIGINT. We had to make sure that our markings gave us the ability to enforce those controls. So everything sort of gets driven by the controls. Now, one of the things we're trying to do in the DoD, and Gurpreet might be able to say more about this, is try to come up with a common set of markings that will apply across wide swaths of defense business. The IC has essentially already done this and has a marking format that's used in the IC. DoD is a much harder problem, but I think can take a similar approach. And then our defense industrial base partners could look at that and say, hey, can I apply a lot of that to the controls I need to apply within my business? Mm-hmm. And don't make it too complicated to start with. You might look at NSA's example and say, wow, their markings are really complicated and rich and sophisticated. And it's like, yeah, it took us a while to get there. Yeah. Right? Start with simple stuff, the core kinds of policy controls that you need to apply. There are multiple specifications out there for how to apply that to data. So if you can, don't make up your own. Use one of the ones that's already out there. And then start monitoring it and see what works and what doesn't and what policy you need to be able to apply next.
Thanks. Well, we're out of time. Oh, however, I want to give everybody a chance to share any last thoughts. And we'll start with Steve, and we'll work back this way.
So, a couple things. We spent the last hour talking about a lot of information, and I think really netting it down is that there are some basic things to get the ball rolling and get early successes. And I think one piece of guidance is do not analyze the problem to death. Have a plan, but start implementing, start doing it. I think one of the examples Neal talked about from the OT side, start with something that's not going to take down the reactor. But start. But also don't do the football pool. Do something that's got medium level criticality. So number one, it doesn't crash your business when it goes wrong, because it will. But also when you succeed, you have something of value that you've secured. And then move from there. So the key word around zero trust is, that we said 100 times, it's all in the liturgy. It's a journey. And the only way to do a journey is to keep moving. So do something, succeed, measure your success, and then move on to the next one. And continuously improve your zero trust architecture. And I think that if you walk away one thing is that you can start today, you have the tools, you have the capabilities to start, put in that plan, and then to continually improve. Because as we said, and I think I was going to make a joke around that question, is that there is no zero trust architecture that you've achieved. Yeah. You're constantly improving. And that's really the big change from our prior evolutions in security, where we did multi-factor authentication, check. We did firewall, check. Zero trust there's never going to be truly a check. There's going to be, we did better than last year. We're continuing to do better next year. It's that continuous journey, again, that word continuous, that is going to be the mantra of zero trust. And so get started and keep going.
Neal?
Yeah, so everything Steve said. And I'll also say that if you sort of adopt the mindset of zero trust, continuous improvement, understanding what you've got and applying controls to it, then you'll be ready to take on new challenges. Maybe there's a new business you're going into or a new government program that you're trying to protect, right? If you have those mechanisms sort of firmly embedded in how you manage your IT enterprise and your data and your users, then as we've certainly found at NSA, it allows us to take on new challenges more quickly because we can apply the principles in a consistent and continuous way.
Thanks. Gurpreet, the last word for you.
Yeah, I echo everything that's been said so far. So we, from a DoD perspective, are on a journey with a deadline.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of fiscal year 27, which means September 30th, we have to meet zero trust for the entire department. That's a massive undertaking. So what I would say is that we are trying to leverage what we have, our expertise, our technology, our capability. But what we need is really a really tight partnership with industry to bring integrated, innovative solutions to the table. More broader capabilities that we can leverage quickly, but also understanding your lessons learned and how we can grow and evolve in our zero trust thinking as well, right? Our thinking is down on paper in our strategy in the 91 activities and the 152 activities, but that's our view. So what we want is that continuous journey and evolution of how do we do this together, right? This is an ecosystem where we're reliant on you and you're reliant on us at the end of the day. So how do we evolve this? This is a journey we have to embark on and continue. And I think we also recognize that there's no end state to this, right? This is just because we hit 27 doesn't mean I think we start all over again to continue to refresh. So look for that partnership and innovation to be seeping in.
Well, thank you. This has been a great discussion. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists today. And if you can hang tight for just a minute, I'd like to thank our sponsors today, CACI, Cisco, Mantech, and SAIC. And of course, I want to thank everyone who took time out of their morning to join us today. I'd like to give you a few previews of some things that INSA has coming up. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we have one of our coffee and conversation programs with Kyle Rector, who's from CIA. He's their Deputy Director of the Office of AI. And also Chip Usher, who's the Senior Director for Intelligence over at the Special Competitive Studies Project. They're going to be looking at what you need to do in the AI world for an AI-ready workforce, data authenticity, generative AI, and some more topics. So that'll be a really nice coffee and conversation for tomorrow. Next week, Thursday, the day after Valentine's Day, we're hosting the Charlie Allen Achievement Awards at the Army-Navy Country Club. We'll be awarding 7 extraordinary early to mid-career professionals with these awards. And we'll be joined by NGA's Deputy Director, Tanya Wilkerson. She'll be giving opening remarks and keynote. It's a very festive evening. Hope you can join us there. On Wednesday, the 21st, we have another virtual event. We're partnering with an organization, the Black Professionals in International Affairs. And we'll be having a panel discussion about cultivating and retaining diverse talent in national security. We have a terrific lineup of speakers in that event from DCSA, from the ODNI, from NGA, and from the HPSI. And our friend Charles Carithers is going to be the moderator for that program. Then we got 2 big events to wrap up, or 1 big event to wrap up the month on February the 29th. We're having a leadership breakfast with FBI Director Christopher Wray. And then at the end of March, on the 28th of March, we have an INSA leadership dinner with the Director of NGA, Vice Admiral Frank Whitworth, or Trey Whitworth. And then, if you didn't see it yesterday, we just announced this year's Baker Award winner, and that is retired General Paul Nakasone, U.S. Army, former director of NSA and commander of Cyber Command. He'll be receiving the Baker Award at our big black tie gala. Mark it on your calendars, Saturday, the 1st of June, over at the Omni Showroom in Washington. There'll be over 600 people in attendance, and we hope you're one of them. You can learn about this and all our events at insaonline.org. Finally, you're going to get an email, say, how did we did? Do you like this program? It'll be in your inbox later today. Please take a second to fill out the 1 or 2 questions we have and give us some feedback. We'd really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.